GEOG306. I'm Riley, and this is my final assignment for Unit 7. Um, Today I'm looking at how housing, and specifically homeownership, has shifted from a unifying part of Canadian identity to one of the country's most significant emerging fault lines. I'm focusing on generational, geographic, and class divisions, and how these reshape belonging and cohesion in Canada. Before we look at markets or policy, we need to understand that identity begins with place. Housing shapes how people build routines, relationships, and a sense of self. As geographers and academics argue, home is both material and affective. It's foundational to how people imagine themselves within a nation. So, housing is central to how identity and belonging are produced in Canada. Neighborhoods also play a key role. Forest and cairns show how local attachments support trust and cohesion, and how inequality fragments people into different social worlds. Historically, accessible homeownership allowed Canadians to put down roots and build stable lives. But as that stability disappears, so does the foundation for national belonging. If people can't imagine a future in one place, their connection to the country becomes weaker. And before housing became a Canadian fault line, it actually functioned as a unifying force. During the post-war decades, federal programs and suburban expansion made home ownership widely accessible. This stability helped produce a cohesive middle class and acted as a centripetal force that pulled Canadians into a shared social world. After World War II, federal and provincial governments expanded homeownership through CMHC programs, mortgage insurance, and mass suburban development. These policies tied citizenship to property and embedded economic security in the ability to buy a home. Suburbanization then produced shared middle-class routines, things like commuting, childcare, neighborhood associations, and recreational spaces. These all align people's everyday lives across regions. This shared lifestyle played a major role in cultivating a cohesive sense of Canadian belonging and identity. Housing also operated within the broader welfare state model. Stable, affordable home ownership distributed opportunity downward, creating a widely accessible pathway to stability and mobility. Together, these forces made property ownership a powerful centripetal mechanism. It drew Canadians into a common social world and laid foundations for a national identity built on security, predictability, and the promise of upward mobility. So, as affordability collapsed, the housing system shifted from anchoring Canadians in shared middle-class pathways to producing sharp spatial and social divides. What once acted as a centripetal force now operates as a centrifugal one, fragmenting class, region, and generation. This graph illustrates a decisive rupture in Canada's housing trajectory. Up until the early 1990s, real disposable income and real house prices moved in relative alignment. But beginning in the 2000s and accelerating after 2015, house prices decoupled dramatically from local incomes. This divergence is not simply a market anomaly. It reflects a fundamental restructuring of the political economy of housing. So, beginning in the 1990s, federal withdrawal from social housing marked a shift from welfare state model toward neoliberal governance. Responsibility for providing houses was devolved to markets, municipalities, and households. As social housing programs were dismantled, housing transitioned from a social infrastructure to a vehicle for capital accumulation. This period saw the rise of real estate investment trusts, speculative ownership, and globalized capital flows, all of which increasingly disconnected housing values from the everyday incomes of residents. In other words, housing became valued less for its social function and more for its capacity to generate returns. What the graph really captures is the material outcome of that shift, a market that no longer reflects wages, but investment logics. Neoliberal policy reframed residents as investors, normalizing the idea that property ownership is synonymous with citizenship and security. This ideological shift eroded housing's earlier role as a cohesive social institution, one that once supported the emergence of a broadly stable middle class in post-war Canada. As we have reiterated in class, neoliberal urbanism generates uneven geographies. The financialization of housing intensifies these inequalities, not only between homeowners and renters, but also across class, region, and generation. The housing system that once functioned as a centripetal force, drawing Canadians into a shared social world, has now become centrifugal, producing widening divisions that fracture national cohesion. Canada is witnessing the rise of new class formations shaped by housing inequality, financialized markets, and generational wealth transfers. These divides are reshaping what used to be a relatively cohesive middle class, where we could all relate. This is where housing begins to operate as a centrifugal force, pulling Canadians increasingly apart. So, in contemporary Canada, housing inequality is reshaping class formation in ways that disrupt what used to be a relatively cohesive middle class. On one side, we now have a growing asset-owning class whose economic security is tied not to wages or professions, but to rising property values. Their wealth expands through capital appreciation and not income growth. On the other side, a rapidly expanding property-less class, including renters, young adults, and newcomers to the country, face a different trajectory. With incomes increasingly decoupled from housing markets, their ability to achieve long-term stability or mobility is structurally constrained. These divides are also spatial. Housing wealth is concentrated in metropolitan regions like Toronto, Vancouver, and Victoria, while peripheral regions experience stagnation or decline. Geography becomes another layer of stratification for those who want access to opportunity but are locked out. And the general dimension intensifies this further. The largest intergenerational wealth transfer in Canadian history is underway as aging boomers pass on accumulated property wealth. Those positioned to inherit enter the asset economy. Those who do not fall further behind. Together, these forces destabilize shared middle-class identities, and this is where housing shifts from centripetal force that once held Canada together to a centrifugal one that increasingly pulls Canadians into separate social worlds with fundamentally different future. So, housing precarity reshapes not just economic outcomes, but the foundations of national identity. Home is not just a material structure, but is an effective symbolic space. As stability declines, the relational and place-based foundations of belonging weaken, producing fractures in trust, community, and national cohesion. Housing precarity reshapes not just economic trajectories, but the foundations of national identity. As we discussed earlier, home is not only a material structure, it's an effective and symbolic space. Blunt describes home as central to how people understand self, family, nation, and place. When people can no longer secure stable housing, that entire structure of belonging becomes unsettled. Historically, accessible homeownership enabled Canadians to form families, put down roots, and build routines that supported a cohesive national identity. But as housing stability continues to collapse, that sense of national cohesion is weakening. Many young adults delay or abandon family formation, not because of personal preference, but because the material conditions of the market make stability unattainable. Essentially, this erodes the life course markers that once tied individuals to national narratives, progress, and belonging. Neighborhoods also matter here. Forrest and Kearns argue that local attachments foster trust, social cohesion, and shared moral purpose. But uneven housing markets increasingly fragment Canadians into separate social worlds. Some live in secure, appreciating homes. Others experience chronic precarity, displacement, and rent burden. These divergent material realities undermine trust in institutions and weaken attachment to the broader national community. This also connects to what we studied in Unit 6, that identity is relational and tied to place. When people cannot imagine a future in the place they live, their relationship to the nation becomes unstable, and spatial inequality intensifies resentment across class, region, and generation. Ultimately, we are left with the central question: what does it mean to belong to a country you can no longer afford to live in? To conclude, the Canadian housing system has undergone major transformation, where it once acted as a force that pulled us together, a stabilizing foundation that unified regions, supported families, and anchored national identity. It is increasingly centrifugal and fragmenting the country into new separate material realities. Class divisions, spatial divides, and generational inequalities now shape who gets to feel secure and who is pushed into precarity. But these outcomes are not predetermined. The forces pulling Canada apart can also be addressed through meaningful housing policy, reinvestment in public infrastructure, and a renewed commitment to making national belonging accessible to all Canadians, not just those positioned to inherit or buy into the market. A more equitable housing landscape would not only restore stability, but would also rebuild the foundation of shared identity and national cohesion. The future of Canada's social fabric depends on recognizing housing as central to that collective project. Thank you for listening, and thanks for the course, Cam. Cheers.